evening. Thank you very much, Serge, for your warm welcome. It's a huge honor for me to be here as your keynote speaker on your first day of Conservation Lab, particularly because I'd say about, I'm not a conservation biologist. I'm not an ecologist. So for me to be a keynote speaker here means either the standards here are really low, or you're trying to do this unconference thing really well by bringing someone who's not really qualified to speak about conservation. But I'm gonna share with you a few perspectives which I hopefully can enlighten your discussions over the next couple of days. I want to really first start by telling you my story about how I became passionate about conservation. As Serge mentioned, I'm from Ghana originally, so I was born in West Africa. But every 4 years of my life as a child, I moved to a new country in Africa. So at the age of 4, I left and we went to Gambia. And then at the age of 8, went to Botswana. Are you guys from Botswana? Beautiful Okavango Delta in Botswana. And then at the age of 12, my family sent me to school in Zimbabwe. Right? And I spent 4 years there. And then I went off to study in the United States. I went to college in this cold part of the U.S. called Minnesota.
All right.
Right? And when I arrived in Minnesota, one of the first things that the Americans said to me, they said, "Oh, so Fred, you grew up in Botswana and Zimbabwe. You lived there for about 10 years collectively. Have you ever seen a lion? Have you ever seen a zebra?" I said, "Yeah, I have, in a zoo, just like you." Because my family could never afford the $500 a night at the time to go to the fancy game lodges in Botswana or in Zimbabwe. So here I was, a young African in the United States, and I'd never experienced wildlife. I graduated from college, and I moved to South Africa, and so that was my 5th African country to live in. Yeah, exactly. Woo. And I joined a company, a management consulting company called McKinsey. And we won't talk about McKinsey anymore. Let's not talk about McKinsey anymore. At the time, it was a good company. Anyway, no, it's still a good. Anyway, I joined McKinsey, and McKinsey was doing some work with Conservation Corporation at the time, which, as many of you know, had different lodges. And part of the deal, McKinsey was doing pro bono consulting. And so consultants could go and stay at Conservation Corporation lodges for 500 Rand a night. So I was like, oh, sounds good. I'll go to one of these places. And so I asked the guys in the office, where's a good place to go? And they said, why don't you go to this place, Londolozi. So that was my first time ever to see a leopard, to see a lion in the wild. I was 22, and I was just blown away. Of course, if Londolozi is your first safari experience, I had no idea. I was like, why is everyone here so much older than me, and why do all the women have so much jewelry? I had no idea how much it cost, that it was 5,000 Rand a night or whatever it was back then, right? How much is Londolozi now, like 20,000 Rand a night, something? But that is when I saw this magical thing that we had, that I had lived on this continent for so long and had never experienced. And I fell in love with wildlife, and got more interested in our natural habitat. And from then onwards, any time I had a chance to go to a game reserve, I would go. And I've been to so many game reserves now. It's one of my most, the things that I treasure the most, going out and experiencing this amazing treasure that we have as a continent. But so many young people in Africa grow up like this. They experience wildlife as something that doesn't belong to them, that's locked away for the benefit of tourists and other people to come and enjoy. And I remember thinking that this just doesn't seem right. This needs to change. And so that's one thing that has been driving me and thinking through about how do we think differently about this asset that we have. The second thing that really got me to think about conservation's potential is in my work, my day job, as Serge mentioned, I'm working to develop Africa's future leaders. So the goal we have is to develop 3 million leaders for Africa, not by 2050, but by 2035. Because that's the date by which Africa will have the largest workforce in the world. By 2035, we'll have 1 billion people in this continent that need jobs. And so that's less than 6,000 days from today. And so our goal is to develop 3 million leaders who will ensure that that billion has good opportunity. They have jobs, they have healthcare, they have education. And that this continent is really prosperous, right? So that's the goal that we're on, and we've got a disruptive way of identifying and developing Africa's future talent. Now, as we think about this, one of the things that we do differently at this university is we want to produce problem solvers, innovators, entrepreneurs who are going to address Africa's biggest challenges and capture its greatest opportunities. So we've reflected over the years and thinking, and all this has really come from all my experience of living and working in different parts of Africa. We came up with a list of what we call the 7 grand challenges and the 7 great opportunities that Africa faces. So the 7 challenges are the big problems that if we don't solve them, we're just screwed. And the whole world is doomed, right? So these are big challenges that Africa is facing, like urbanization. Do you know that 800 million people are going to move into African cities in the next 40 years? That's a massive challenge, right? How do we think about urban planning and architecture and civil engineering, sanitation issues? That's a huge problem that we have to solve, right? Another big challenge is education. You know, the youngest population in the world, the fastest growing. How are we going to educate and upskill all these people? Infrastructure. How are we going to build cities and, and highways and energy and so forth? Healthcare, climate change, governance, big one, of course, the biggest problem we have in Africa. And job creation. How are we going to create jobs for this 1 billion people? So these are the big challenges that these leaders we're developing. We say, so one of the things that we do differently at ALU is, traditional universities give you a menu of academic disciplines, a Bachelor of Arts in Physics, Bachelor of Science in Physics, Chemistry, Economics, and so forth. We rather give our young leaders this menu of challenges and opportunities. And we say, don't declare an academic major, declare a mission for your life. Pick one of these problems and figure out how you're going to build your learning and your skills to solve these problems. Right? So you create a whole generation of problem solvers. But we also have a list of what we call the 7 great opportunities. And this is where Africa has been blessed. This is the low-hanging fruit, where we have no excuse but to be world-class in these areas because we have unusual competitive advantages that the rest of the world doesn't have. So on that list is agriculture, right? We have the largest amount of arable land in the world that has not yet been cultivated, plenty of rain, plenty of sunshine. Yet we spend $40 billion a year importing food into Africa that we have perfect conditions to grow. That's a travesty. And we could be the world's breadbasket if we just got our act together. Natural resources, the same thing. We have gold, diamonds, minerals, and we export it all to the West without adding any value, right? Arts, culture, and design. The rest of the world is desperate for content now, right? But yet, they keep making the same Fast and the Furious movie, the same, Batman 10. Like, come on. We have so much creativity in Africa. And the wonderful thing about it is that it just requires brain power, right? It doesn't require much capital. So you go on this list. Tourism, it's a big opportunity, massive untapped opportunity. Obviously, you are all, key players in trying to capture this opportunity, but there's so much more that we can do, right? And of course, wildlife conservation is one. This is, again, where we have a unique asset that the rest of the world doesn't have, right? Unique biodiversity. It's a competitive advantage that we have, and we need to think about how do we actually leverage this to become a force for growth on the continent, right? And to drive our prosperity and create opportunity for people in Africa. So so these are the ways in which I really think about conservation. Really thinking about it, that this is something that is one of Africa's greatest assets, and that we should think about as a key pillar for economic development. So it's one of our greatest assets, and therefore I believe that We need a fresh, innovative approach to capture this opportunity. Right? So the question that I ask myself is, how can we make conservation a growth industry for Africa? Right? Today, when I ask many young people, and I work with lots of young people in Africa, I say, what do you want to do when you grow up? I almost never hear, I want to be a conservationist. It's not the answer that I get. It's not something that people are going into, right? If we're seeing that this is one of our greatest opportunities, one of our biggest opportunities for economic development, we need to think about how we make it a growth industry. So that, because you see, today, when we use the word conservation, it's a defensive term because you're trying to preserve something that is shrinking. That's what it means, right? How do we flip it and say, let's actually think about expanding what we have? How do we think about growing this asset that we have? Not just protecting it. How do we think about making it much bigger and much more abundant, right? And that's really the reframing that I really believe we need to think about if we're going to actually capture its full potential on the continent. So in my mind, whenever you look at growth industries, whether it's, high tech or everyone's talking about AI and blockchain and, drone technology, all these cool things that excite young people today. And that, many people want to get jobs in. There's typically three things that need to come together for growth industries to take place. The first is you need talent, right? Young people, where young people are going is where the growth is going to go. And as I mentioned, young people today don't think about going into conservation. It's not the kind of thing that they would love to talk about at the cocktail party. So perhaps maybe we need to think about changing the whole name of the industry, right? Because when you're at the cocktail party, you want a young person. Conservation should be sexy, right? So perhaps you should be calling it environmental investing or something. So you go to cocktail and say, what do you do? I'm an environmental investor. Sounds like an investment banker, right? This is what we need to think about. Let's talk about growing this asset that we have, not just trying to defend something that we're losing a battle on, right? So one of the key things that I think is important for us to be able to attract the right folks into the sector and to make it that sexy thing that young, passionate, innovative Africans, the best brains, people who would otherwise go and work for Google and Facebook and Bain and Goldman Sachs and McKinsey should be going to conservation, right? Our best brains should be going to conservation. How do you do that? One of the things I think we need to do is that conservation needs to come out of the shadows. Today, this is a sector that is very secretive, right? It's known by very few people, and it's not something that is out there and connecting with other sectors. Too often, conservationists are talking to other conservationists. And we need to get conservationists engaging with people in the media, in politics, in business. It needs to be something that is a national conversation, not just something that is a niche within the conservation community. So who's the face of conservation today? There's typically four types of conservationists. You have the activist, you have the technical scientist, the ecologist, the biologist, you have the billionaire, usually a Western billionaire, and then you have the tourism professional. This is typically who's doing conservation today, right? And so one of the things I believe is we need to change this face. Of course, this face needs to stay in there, but we need to bring more voices into this industry. So how about this? Jack Ma, tech entrepreneur, Alibaba, he's the person that young people look up to, right? He's cool. And it's exciting that he's getting into conservation. So I know Jack Ma, and what he told me personally is that the three things, he's stepping down from Alibaba, and the three things that he wants to do is education, entrepreneurship, and conservation. So last year he started an award to give African rangers a prize, the Jack Ma African Rangers Prize, and this year he's asked me to be a judge on that prize. But it's cool when people like Jack Ma are getting into conservation, right? And this is what we need to see. Or we look at Danai Gurira. She's actually went to college with Danai. She was my little sister when I was at Macalester College in Minnesota. And I didn't believe that she would amount to anything. I told her, stop doing all this acting stuff. You won't get a job. And as you may know, she's the star in Black Panther, right? And she's now an ambassador for Wild Aid. Now, this guy is not yet involved in conservation. But we need to get him involved in conservation, right? How do you get Trevor Noah to be talking about this? About environmental investing, not conservation, right? And this is what we need, to read.
We can't all be saved by a rhino, but we can all help save them. We're still losing our rhinos to ruthless poachers who kill these beautiful animals just because people want their horns. We're losing our heritage and an important attraction for our tourism industry. So please, report wildlife crime and help protect our rhinos. Because poaching steals from us all.
Right? Again, we need to think about the intersection of conservation with entertainment and politics, business and economics especially, right? Agriculture, climate change. Conservation is not something that is only going to be solved by conservationists, right? We need to bring all these different brains from different sectors because innovation comes when the intersection of disciplines. And so much is happening in these different sectors that needs to come into the sector. Because if you look at agriculture alone, if we improve agricultural yields for farmers, then they don't need to destroy, to burn as much land. They don't need to expand and destroy the habitat because they're much more productive, right? And we need to be thinking and engaging with people in different sectors so we can see how our work intersects with theirs and how we can jointly capture this incredible opportunity. So in line with this, we said that we're going to develop within our university a special school for training this talent. Right? So we launched the African Leadership University School of Wildlife Conservation. Although I think we should change the name, School of Environmental Investing or something. And I want to share with you a couple of stories of some of this talent that we're developing. Young, passionate, innovative, Africa's best that is going into conservation.
My name is Gloria Owera and I am from Kigali, Rwanda, and I'm studying global challenges here at ALU. I'm trying to find my mission. The degree is mission-based. I have to figure out my interest and how I can make them into a career I can pursue. We are very much encouraged to not learn from a lecturer or to not be lectured, but to work together to take our education in our own hands. ALU is proving people that a different kind of education is possible, not just in Rwanda, not just in Africa, but all over the whole world. And I really believe that the successes of ALU will impact how future generations are going to study.
We have two objectives. One is who are currently leading in the conservation space. We want to upskill those individuals, improve their ability to be better managers, better leaders of the programs that they're currently running. And the second objective is to develop a new crop of leaders, African leaders, for the conservation space.
We don't have time to think small. We shouldn't just sit back and hope that good leaders drop from the sky by accident. Let's find a deliberate way to develop a new generation of leaders who can solve Africa's problems.
We need to prepare for the future. We need to prepare our youth to be able to take employment, but also create employment.
We need to promote Africans to start driving the agenda. And you saw how bright these young kids are, and we need these people to start taking charge. of their own wildlife, and not being dictated to all the time.
Most people in the world think conservation is something that happens in national parks, and it's about saving and protecting species. This is about seeing a bigger picture. This is about understanding that conservation is going to be, if harnessed properly, something that could generate jobs, could generate opportunity, could be an economic driver for the development of Africa. It's much more important than banking. It's much more important than making.
What happened to the sound? AV? Anyway, this is one of the young leaders that's in our conservation school. And we're bringing some of the most dynamic and exciting leaders in conservation to come and pass on their knowledge to this generation, right? So Brian Child, who's here, you saw him there. He's one of our guest faculty. Richard Vine from Opojeta Conservancy in Kenya. He's on the board of this conservation school and comes and teaches this next generation of leaders, because he's a great example of conservation entrepreneur with what he's doing in Opojeta, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But it's really about saying, let's get young people like Gloria, right, excited about conservation and the environment. So she is seeing this way before in her life than I got to see it, for example, right? She's only 18, and she's getting to experience this beautiful natural asset that we have. And it's inspiring her, getting excited to go into the sector, right? Because she's seeing it not from a place of, this is a defensive thing, but it's really an area of opportunity. It's a great opportunity for the continent, and I'm going to go and capture it. I'm going to make it happen. Another story is about this man, Terence Chambati. So one of the things we do at the conservation school is we have an MBA for conservation, a Master in Business Administration for Conservation, because we said we want to think about this as a growth industry. So Terence joined the ALU program, and he joined the Conservation MBA. But before that, he was a marketing and advertising executive. He had been in the field for about 20 years, from Zimbabwe originally, but was working in Uganda. And through the 20-month MBA program, he learned about this big opportunity for developing a wildlife economy in Africa. And as part of the program, all the mid-career professionals who are doing the MBA need to identify an innovation and an entrepreneurial opportunity in conservation and to bring it to life. So Terence's project was to do with bee conservation. He got, through his work, he realized that initially he became curious about this, because he was, as a marketing and advertising person, he went into the store and he saw all these different brands of honey, and he saw that it was very poorly packaged. And so he started thinking, how could you package this better, right, and make it actually more attractive to consumers and so forth. But as he studied the issue a bit further and researched it, he actually realized that bees are in huge danger of extinction all around the world. And so that led him to think about building a conservation business, which he calls Hoochie Capital. Ignore the name; it's a bad name. But and he has now launched this thing called the Hoochie Hive, right? Where it's a really interesting approach to bee conservation. And what they do is 4 things. One is they've created a bee tracker, right? So the idea is to put, these tiny sensors on bees, so that as they fly, you can track where they're going and see, for farmers to give them intelligence in terms of, which area of their farmland they're pollinating and so forth. So to really get intelligence, and also to be able to do research to see why are they dying out and so forth, right? So that's really, really interesting what he's doing. And then they've created these smart hives where they're putting sensors. So they're using technology, the Internet of Things, to track the temperature of the hives, the humidity, the noise levels, and so many other factors, so that to see whether hive is actually functioning in a healthy, active way, right? So if all of a sudden there's massive increase in the noise levels in a certain hive, a farmer can tell that, oh, maybe there's a wasp that's entered and there's some kind of intruder, and they know exactly where to go and where the issues are. From all that data, then they want to then develop an insights portal to be able to use data science and analytics to give the industry a sense of what's happening with bees, and then finally to be able to give consulting advice and so forth to people to be able to make better decisions to grow this industry, right? So this came out of his MBA project, and he's now doing this full time. He's quit his job in marketing and advertising, and he's now in bee conservation, right? So this is what we're talking about, right? Getting fresh, innovative African talent, some of our best brains, seeing this as a growth industry and wanting to really grow it. So, and we're doing this not just in any way. Our aspiration is to create the highest level of talent, highest level of African leaders going into the sector. Because today, when you go to most conservation projects, many conservation projects are not led by Africans. And to the extent that you have Africans involved in conservation, very often they're not they're doing some of the lower level jobs in conservation. And we need to flip that, right? By getting our best brains who are most capable leaders into the sector. And that's why we're saying let's attract the highest caliber and develop them in the highest possible, to the highest level, quality standards, right? So this is just some of the recognitions that this university has gotten. This year, Fast Company came up with the 50 most innovative companies in the world. Number 15 on that list was Alibaba. Number 17 was Apple, and number 39 was ALU. It's the only university in the world. It's not Harvard, it's not Oxford, it's not Cambridge, it's not MIT, it's ALU. And so that's what we're trying to do. So let's set our standards high. Let's select the most, exceptional people in Africa. Let's develop their capabilities, their talents, and then let's channel them into these strategic industries that can really grow our continent, like conservation, right? The second thing that growth industries need is they need an enabling environment, right? And in Africa, this really boils down to one thing above everything else: leadership, right? Now, I gave a TED talk about 4 years ago where I talked about the importance of leadership in Africa. Now, one could say that leadership matters everywhere, right? Of course, leadership is important. But one of the things I believe is that leadership, the impact of leadership in any given society is negatively correlated to the strength of the institutions that you have in that society. So what are the institutions? Institutions are the rules that govern how the society works, right? Things like your judicial system, your constitution, your civil society, the police force, and all these rules that make sure how the society works. When you have strong institutions, then leaders can have relatively little impact. They can't really change much. So, for example, the US has very strong institutions. So, you can have crazy people come in as presidents. Donald Trump will come, Donald Trump will go. George Bush will come, George Bush will go. But the US does not get destroyed. It might dip a little bit. But these institutions, so if Donald Trump says he's going to stay in power for more than 2 terms, he can't. Because there's this very strong institutions that will make sure that he can't stay in power forever. If he wants to just print money in the central bank, he can't do that because you've got very strong institutions. So he's been trying to do all these crazy things like, build a wall and they stop him, right? He's been trying to, all these crazy things like, Muslims can't come to the country. Then the federal court, Supreme Court will stop him, right? Because you have all these strong institutions. But in Africa, if you decide you want to be president for life, like happened in Zimbabwe, you can just do that because you don't have strong institutions to stop you, right? If you decide you want to print money, go ahead. So the difference that leaders can make in Africa is far greater than anywhere else because of these weak institutions. So what that means is that if you have just one or two good leaders, and we're talking about political leaders, but also leaders in business and in civil society, if we have good leaders in place, and now we get those leaders to understand the importance of something like conservation, then the change can be very rapid. They're much more powerful than the rest of the world. Because just like the institutions can stop bad leaders like in the US, they can also unfortunately stop good leaders, right, who from doing good things. So when Barack Obama was trying to introduce healthcare, which is a good thing, everyone in the country should have healthcare, the crazy Republicans were stopping him because, you see what I mean? So we have a unique window of opportunity in Africa where we can use the fact that we have weak institutions to drive massive change by developing good leaders. But then one of the things I tell the leaders that we're developing is that it's their job to build the institutions so that after they're gone, they don't have to hope that good leaders will follow them. But that you have strong institutions that will allow the good work to continue, whether good leaders come or not, right? So you can have, now, to South Africa's credit, South Africa has some of the strongest institutions in the continent. And that's why you're able to get rid of Jacob Zuma, right? Because for years there was pressure on him, right? And eventually, in South Africa we'll bounce back because you have these strong institutions, right? And so similarly, everywhere in Africa where you see conservation thriving is because the leaders are taking it seriously. If you look at Rwanda, this is one of President Kagame's top priorities, right? And they built a whole national strategy around, guerrilla tourism and conservation. And they've created the institutional framework such that communities that live around protected areas actually get a direct share of the revenues from tourism and so forth in that area. And so there is wonderful, wonderful protection. There isn't limited human-wildlife conflict. There isn't much poaching because the leaders have taken it seriously. You look at Botswana. You look at Namibia. I mean, what they've done with community conservation against the rules, where they have created the rules that give people that live around protected areas ownership in all the profit, all the revenues that are generated from tourism activities related to the wildlife in the area. And so I was just talking to a woman here, where is she, from Namibia. There you go, yeah. And she was telling me about how, they are seeing much higher numbers of rhino in the unprotected areas where they've given ownership to the communities. Rhino numbers have grown much faster, and there hasn't been any poaching in the last 3 years of rhinos because they've given ownership to the community. And that's the political leadership coming to work, right? And this is what, if we're going to see this industry really take off, we need to change the rules. We need to get the political leaders and the other leaders in society really seeing. So at the end of the day, what we're saying is that conservation is a leadership issue. The greatest lever for change in anything in Africa is going to be through leadership. And unless we get our leaders seeing this as a growth industry, we're not going to be able to really see the opportunities. But what we often are doing is we're talking to the environmental ministry, or we're talking to the Department of Conservation. We should be talking to the finance ministry. We should be talking to the tax authority so that they realize that this is actually a key pillar of their development. And then you start to see the rules changing. And we, again, need to ensure that all the leaders of tomorrow understand how conservation is such a key asset for developing. And so one of the things we do at our university is we ensure that even those who are not specializing in conservation as their mission, 100% of them are going to be exposed to conservation. Because we want to make sure that one day, if you're the president of a country and your minister of the environment and so forth is asking for more money for their budget, you actually understand why this matters. Right? Or if you're the CEO of a company and you're about to chop down a whole forest for a mining project, you'll be able to think twice about what's going to happen to the wildlife that inhabits that forest. So the final thing, so first, as I mentioned, we need the best talent going into this if it's going to be a growth industry. The second is we need our leadership to take it seriously and to make it a priority. And where African leaders make conservation a priority, you see the numbers you actually see abundance in wildlife, right? It's not shrinking. And the third thing that we need to do if we're going to make this a growth industry is we can't do conservation for conservation's sake. Because poverty levels in Africa are so high that unless we show people that conservation actually pays and gives them a better life, gives them more income, jobs, we're not going to be able to really stop poaching. Communities that live around protected areas need to have a stake in conservation. They need to see that this is something that belongs to them and that they actually really benefit tangibly from. Because people say, Africans are poaching. Africans are destroying habitat. Africans don't want to poach. African communities don't want to destroy habitat. They simply want a better life. The reason they're poaching is because they don't have that life. They're trying to survive. The reason they're destroying the habitat is because they're trying to survive. So if we're going to really improve the possibilities for conservation in Africa, we need to think more broadly and not just think about conservation as something that protects land or animals, but really something that benefits people. If we're not going to, until we reframe this, it's going to be a losing battle. We need to see African communities, African people need to see this as something that directly benefits them. And you're seeing that when it's done in Namibia and so forth, you see those outcomes. So, and this means, ultimately achieving a culture change in society. One of the things that we talk about a lot in the work that we do when we're trying to work with some of our corporate clients to change their culture is we advise them, if you want to change the culture, don't aim at it directly, right? So you don't go into a company and say, I'm going to change the culture. It's kind of like going to and give a talk and say, I'm going to inspire you. No, right? You just have to inspire, and then indirectly people will tell you if you're inspiring, right? And similarly, if we're trying to change culture, you have to aim at it indirectly. So as we think about conservation, we shouldn't only be aiming directly and look at human-wildlife conflict and all the things that we talk about, but really looking at how all of these things are connected. If we give African communities increased agricultural yields, then they don't need to cut down the habitat as much. If we create more livable cities, then maybe a lot of people will move into those cities and they will move out of the rural areas and leave plenty of land for wildlife to thrive, right? If we improve economic policy, then they have that better life that they need. And so they don't need to poach. They don't need to engage in all these. Climate change, we improve all that. And again, finally, you get conservation as the outcome. So we need to think about how all these things are connected. And our challenge is to go from this. Today, when we look at most protected areas, in the middle, where you've got the lions and the elephants and the habitat, is where the dollars are going, right? And a lot of the investment is going in the middle, and these are the people who live around the protected area. And this is the constant conflict that we see. How do we go to this? Where we're investing all the dollars outside in the people, and then we don't have to worry about what's happening inside because it's going to be abundant, right? And this is really the reframing that we need to think about. Unless we get this change, it's always going to be a fight. So I'll end by playing a short video of a conference that we did. We launched a conference last year called the Business of Conservation Conference, really aimed at this thing, to say, how do we think differently about conservation, to not look at conservation for conservation's sake, but really as a means to an end, where the end is economic development and to benefit African people. How do we look at conservation as one of the key assets that we have that's going to drive economic growth and create prosperity for our people? And we made sure when we designed this conference that maximum 1/3 of the attendees would be conservationists, because we wanted to bring in these different actors, right? The politicians and the media and the technologists and the entertainers and all, to really start to make this a continental coalition to capture one of our greatest assets, to make sure that we can really use this as a pillar for economic development. And so I'll just show a short clip so you can see what happened at this event.
Business of conservation. What better place to have such a conference than here in Rwanda?
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our guest of honor, His Excellency Paul Kagame, the President of the Republic of Rwanda.
The business of conservation is everyone's business. The African conservation agenda should be owned, indeed, and driven by us. Our people stand to harvest the benefits, and also it is our responsibility.
Conservation must be led by Africans, and we need African wildlife entrepreneurs who are going to lead our initiatives and who are going to create the wildlife businesses. We need to develop more African leaders who have the innovation, the talent, and the leadership capabilities to really make this opportunity real. And this is the niche we're trying to fill with our School of Wildlife Conservation.
We, as a young generation, we will be the generation, and we must be the generation that will end our poaching and the killing of our elephants and animals once and for all.
Wild nature and its beauty is the world's most important asset, most valuable asset. I'm fully convinced, and I hope we can start to think and work in that way.
Some of these scientific reports that are produced in conferences and places like this are not necessarily read and put into use. But when you put it in a story, like we are seeing in the films here, you have a better chance actually of reaching the audience that will be able to drive the kind of change or improvements that are required.
Welcome to Africa.
You just heard mention that I founded the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit, the Wild Crew. At that time, we were the first university-based conservation research unit in the world. And now, look at this room. Look at how the field has grown. Think of how almost every university in the world is aspiring to contribute to conservation.
We want economists, architects, engineers, everyone to be conservationist. Because conservation should not be a degree that we got, but a way of being.
So whether it be games or data visualizations or other techniques that bring wildlife stories to a larger audience, we have to get out of our comfort zone of who we're engaging and how we're engaging them.
There's no one in this room who likes to go out to a safari and just 100 meters down the line witnesses the worst poverty ever. We should have commitments to communities in those conservation areas.
So our project has to do with sea turtles, and what we're committing to is $2 million towards loggerhead sea turtle conservation in Boa Vista.
We are pledging $45 million for a new conservation project, which will support the conservation leadership program. So that's a little bit the commitment from the World Bank. Thank you.
We're going to commit somewhere between $75 and $125 million.
These commitments collectively should impact 1.6 million people.
So thank you for bringing us together. And the thinking here is that even if I may not have a lot of smart ideas to offer, I like to still come back because I can learn here. Thanks, everyone.
So most of the people who attended this conference had never had seen anything to do with conservation before. And we wanted to really get, like we said, let's get conservation out of the shadows and into the mainstream so that people see this as one of Africa's greatest assets for growth. And what really struck me, so we had several billionaires at this conference. And we did like a Shark Tank kind of thing, where we asked 50 people who were CEOs of conservation organizations with 20, 30 years of experience. We said, you've got 3 minutes to pitch to this group. There was something like $20 billion of net worth in the room. And we said, make your case and ask for what you need from this group. Tell them why they should invest in your project. And what was really interesting to me was every single CEO who went up couldn't make the ask. They would go on and on, they would raffle for 3 minutes, and they wouldn't ask. They couldn't make their case for why people should invest in their business. And that, for me, was such a revelation that we really need to think differently about this if we're going to make it a growth industry. If the CEOs of conservation organizations in front of a room of potential investors who could back their projects could not make the case in 3 minutes and couldn't ask for the money and explain why this was a good investment, then we're in real trouble. And so this is a change that we need if we're going to be able to really capture this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. I think it was awesome. Would you mind taking some questions?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm going to ask some questions, but I wanted to rely on the point that you were giving at the end. Like I said, it's like I think like Credit Suisse produced a report quite a few years ago that was quite interesting, saying that actually they advise a lot of billionaires around the world or high net worth individuals about how to invest their money in conservation. And what actually one of the things that they found the most difficult is that most people have an idea to save something, but they don't have a business plan to save something. And that's the difficulty is like most people who are philanthropists are usually entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs have been taught and learned very hardly to count the paper clips. And for them, that everything is laid by an Excel spreadsheet. It's like $1 here means something at the end of it. And if they're not given these equations, it's very difficult for them to engage in a business capacity into a project, because they don't mind giving $10 million if they save X amount of animal for X years or whatever. But if it's just for a cause, they just can't comprehend how to invest. And he said that that's one of the biggest others said there is tons of money out there, but these people need to be given something that can function on an Excel spreadsheet to basically part with their money. So that's another skill. How you make people parting with their money, but with good business plan. But I think that if someone wants to ask questions in the room, it'll be great for Fred. So do we have any question here? Or is the wine taking its effect?
So on your university, you have a conservation aspect. And what's the other aspect of the university? Or is it all conservation?
No, so those 7 challenges and the 7 opportunities, we're developing 3 million leaders to address all of them. And we're asking them, we don't want to define where they go. We're saying, expose them to these challenges and opportunities and then have them pick their passion. And then they go in and build their learning around it. So for example, the ones who are doing the conservation, when they choose that as their mission, every year they spend 8 months learning and 4 months in internships in conservation. So by the time they graduate, they've already had a year of work experience in the field and they're exposed to this and so forth. So, but yeah, it's different. But we have a school of wildlife conservation as one of the schools that we're building within the university.
And how many students go through your university a year?
Right now we're at about 1,500, but the plan is 3 million in the next 16 years, by 2035.
Question over there?
Thank you, Fred. I know everything Fred touches turns to gold because I am a parent of one of his fantastic projects. So, Fred, to me, it looks like this problem is really urgent. The challenge of flipping the conservation narrative, and you've started one university. Do you plan to upscale? Are you going to go to different places and start more institutions? Are you just going to stay in Rwanda? Or are you going to train trainers that can then teach what you're doing to other places? Because to me, the urgency is real. I can just see the impact that what you're doing could have in the rest of Africa. The youth in Africa are just dying for what you're doing. How are you going to upscale? Thank you.
So she's a mother of Sam Kiru from our first class at the ALA. The idea is to roll out these all over. I mean, so we started, where Sam went was in South Africa. We have the academy in South Africa, but we have a campus in Mauritius. We have another one in Rwanda. We've opened something in Kenya now. We have a model where we can open a new site in about 60 days. So we are opening, another one in Nigeria, Casablanca. We're going to go to Gabon, Senegal, all the places. So yes, we are rolling this out because remember the target is 3 million leaders. We're not going to develop them all in Rwanda or Kenya, but we're opening in different places. But yes, I mean, what we are trying to do is to really develop a model of learning, which is, completely innovative and reimagining. Because see, the nice thing about Africa, there are many, many challenges we have in Africa. But the one thing we have is that we have a clean slate. And we have many constraints, and constraints drives innovation. But you have to reimagine and start from scratch. Like we need to rethink and not just continue doing the same thing over and over. So if, what my challenge to everyone in this room is, if we're disappointed with the outcomes we're seeing in conservation, we need to then reimagine and think about how do you, bring innovation and disruption and so forth so that we can really take it to a different place. And we've done that with our university where for, a cost as low as $2,000 a year, we're getting, talent that is competing with kids from Stanford and Oxford and Yale who are paying $70,000 a year. That's the reimagination. So we're rolling that out, but we want other schools to copy us. We want to train teachers from other schools and universities. We want to, because the problem is urgent. We have this massive youth population, and we can't be the only ones to solve it, right? We need to, to work with others and with governments and so forth so that they can adopt some of what we're doing. So we definitely don't want to just selfishly lock it to the few that we're developing. We want the model to be replicated, as because it's a different way of education which produces, it's at high speed and high quality and low cost.
Maybe last question, if there is one.
Yeah.
For them?
Okay. Thank you. It's a dream of mine. I love universities and innovative universities. We are building the African People's Cooking School with focus, or our curriculum wants to focus on how the youth can adapt to climate tragedy coming upon. But Serge, I'm not bringing a but, and I'm not bringing, I need to challenge.
You can't?
No, I'm not. There are two things that shut me down, sorry. You mentioned Jack Ma and you mentioned Alibaba. And you mentioned that Jack Ma is actually supporting now the Ranger Awards.
Yeah.
Now, Paula, back me up. There's a famous man in Kenya called Carl Ackerman. A report came out from Carl Ackerman only a week ago. Jack Ma and Alibaba actually, with the money they give to the Cape Town Awards, is money from our wildlife trade. And that has been researched and backed up. So I would like to ask you to take that name away, or I share the report with you. It's very thorough. And Serge, I've been to a show. It's happened every 2 years in Italy, in Turin, called Terra Madre. Terra Madre invites the best speakers of the world. And what I've learned at that show is about greenwashing. And we need to be extremely careful where we get our money from or who will sponsor us. Out of each speaker show at Terra Madre, we walked out. The guy has this great passion of building African tradition and letting Africans feel proud again of who they are and rerouting them, and it all goes through food. You saw me speaking about food. But we walked out of every single presentation and we say, Viva la Revolution. And this is what needs to happen. You know, that's what I said to you. Tell the youth to strike. They need to learn how to strike, and this is how we move forward. Anyway, I needed to share this. Sorry.
It's a very good point. Share the report.
I'd like to see that report, yes.
I will. It is in German. Paula, do you have it in English? No? Okay, well, we'll need to translate it over the night and then share it. But Karl Ackermann, very famous in Kenya. And yeah, I will see if I can get it in English. Maybe they have it.
Please forward it.
Yeah, please, we'd love to see that. Any final questions?
Fred, over here at the back. Sorry, hi. Great job, by the way. Very good. It's a very interesting talk. I'm just interested. I'm a journalist, and I write on all the sort of trade and stuff on wildlife. I'm just interested in the curriculum.
Just remember the Chatham House rules. Very important.
Sorry, sir.
The Chatham House rules.
Very funny. No, listen. The trade.
serious.
Just interested in the curriculum that you're going to be sort of giving at these at this university. Is it going to be the Southern African model of sustainable utilization, or the East African model of something more inclusive?
So, I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, we are trying to ensure that benefits go to African communities, right? So it's really about developing leaders who understand that conservation cannot happen if African communities don't have a stake in it. And right now, I think too many African communities don't experience, like I didn't believe that this was something that belonged to me, and I lived in Botswana and Zimbabwe, right? So if we don't change that, we're not going to, this is a losing battle. So, for sure, but what we are really doing is looking at different models of conservation, looking at what's working, what's not working, reimagining things that haven't been tried as well. Because it's not just about the Southern African model or the East African model, but it's really about saying which is the model that's going to work, and then innovating and exploring and trying new things, where the end goal is to create an abundance of wildlife and an abundance of nature, and such that people see that this is one of the greatest assets that we have, and that they see the reason why they should invest in this, and that's really the end goal. So whichever curriculum we need to get to that end goal is what we're going to use.
Any other question? Just one thing on this Jack Ma stuff got me thinking, is I just want to know, is it, I haven't read reports, and I don't know about the allegation either, but Colin knows, so he's going to tell about it. But I want to know, is it like, because when you said the money comes from the trade, is it like the kind of a eBay where eBay authorized to have product to be sold on the platform, and therefore he indirectly or he directly benefit for it? And it's just like, is it like a negligence, or is it actively trade? I've got no idea. But just to clarify everything for everyone.
Okay, so this Jack Ma story is actually very serious. And I've engaged directly with him and his partner and the fellow who runs Paradise Foundation, which is washing all their activities. And let's step back a bit. There was many years where Alibaba was the main conduit for counterfeit goods for Gucci and all the rest of it. And Gucci is owned by a trading company, and they have a whole lot of luxury branches, and they luxury brands, and they tried for years to try and get Alibaba to stop the sale of counterfeit goods on Alibaba platforms. And after 5 years of being fobbed off, eventually they decided, it's the Kerala group, and they decided the only way they're going to tackle this is to take Alibaba to court in New York City. Within 1 week of being embarrassed by this court case, Jack Ma authorized 150 people to be employed inside Alibaba, and they trawled the entire Alibaba website, and they got rid of all the counterfeit goods in 1 week. So there's two companies involved with the trading platform. There's Alibaba, which is relatively clean, but they own a company called Taobao, which is an extraordinary internet platform where if you want to get the most extraordinary wildlife endangered species products, and the latest one, which has just come out now, by the way, the guy's name is Carl Ammann, and one of the latest products you want to buy on Taobao is pink tiger bones. And the only way you can get pink tiger bones is that you've got to extract the bones from a living tiger. And you can buy that on Taobao today. You can buy most counterfeit goods, rhino horn, ivory, all the rest of it on Taobao. So we went to Jack Ma when he was here, and we challenged him to go and do exactly what he did with Gucci. And he fobbed us off, and he's got the Ranger Awards, and he gives a bit of money to guys in Kenya and stuff like that. But Jack Ma, with a one phone call, can cut down most of the illegal trade, which happens from Africa and around the world and gets laundered into the Chinese market. And Jack Ma has, over the last year of debating with him and his senior people, and he's given us all the underlings, and we've gone through the underlings, and we've debated with them, and we said, please, come on, guys. With one phone call, you can cut down most of the illegal trade in Africa. And to this day, he has not. So Taobao, if you want to go and have a look, go and look on Taobao. You'll find just about anything you want to buy. The latest thing which has cropped up since the March ban on ivory trade in China has been now suddenly there's mammoth, they can buy mammoth tusks. And you can guess where mammoth tusks are arising from. They're arising from Africa and all the rest. And what they do is goes from Taobao, it goes into WeChat, and WeChat is owned by Tencent. So we're very close to the headquarters of Naspers. And Naspers is a big shareholder in Tencent, and Tencent is the owner of WeChat, and WeChat is one of the transfers of illegal goods. Goes from Taobao into WeChat, and WeChat is where the business takes place. So we in South Africa, again, are one of the major proponents of making sure that illegal trade prospers. It's a very sad story.
Thanks, Colin, as usual, for the clarity. I think there was the final question.
Yeah, well,
So,
really.
sorry, nobody's like... oh, sorry, there's another question? Or?
Yeah,
So last one, very last one.
Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you for everything that you shared. The one question I had is I was wondering if you could expand upon the sort of unfortunate time gap we have from where we are today and the reality of churning out incredible conservation leaders and actually having them get a job and reaching out to these different industries of engaging and shifting in this paradigm shift that you discussed, which I think is exactly the right direction. But it seems that there is this sort of space and time of catch-up between the leaders coming out and getting ready and the actual job market. You know, I work with a lot of conservation practitioners all over the world that are really struggling right now to get by. And the next generation, part of the reason they're not stepping up to go into this field is because they don't see a lot of potential jobs. So I was wondering if you could expand upon that in terms of how are you working with your leaders to advise them on the next steps while we're creating this incredible shift that you spoke about?
So I think that the work that we're doing is we're trying to work across generations. So as much as we're developing the next generation of conservation leaders, we're also working with mid-career professionals, and more mature leaders, like the example I gave of this Terrence guy. He's got 20 years of experience, and he's now channeling his talents into conservation. And we're also trying to influence the way political leaders and business leaders think about conservation, right? So by trying to get senior leaders at the whether it's ministers and presidents and CEOs to think differently about conservation, right? And to be able to influence them. So yeah, if this is really what's happening with Jack Ma, then let's have a conversation with him and say, okay, this is something that, are you aware of this, and what can you do about it, right? So that you can actually have that immediate impact. But the way that I believe that this next generation is going to be excited about conservation and are going to go into it is if they think entrepreneurially, right? So infused in this curriculum is innovation and entrepreneurship, because if you're going and say, I'm going to look for a job in conservation, you might not find it. But if you're thinking like an entrepreneur, then you're going to create your own job, like what this guy has done with the bee conservation, right? And he's building a company, right? So we need to get, because this is it's not just in conservation, it's in all sectors, all economies, all those different challenges and opportunities. We need to get young people to realize that this is where their jobs are going to come from. So if, for example, you look at the one challenge I talked about with, of urbanization, and you realize that there are 800 million people moving to cities in Africa, one of the things that's going to come to your mind is that, wow, how are we going to clean up the garbage in all these cities? Then you start thinking like an entrepreneur. You're like, oh, maybe I'm going to create a business around that. And then you can actually become a garbage billionaire by cleaning up these African cities. If you think about, low-cost housing that you need, and you reimagine and you realize we can't build houses the way they've been done, we need to rethink it. And you come across this technology, which I recently found out about, where you can 3D print a home in 24 hours for $4,000. Right? Then you're like, that's the solution we need in Africa. And then you build a business around that. So it's about getting young people to really look at these challenges and opportunities as where the entrepreneurial opportunities are going to come from, and to rethink how we are solving them using innovation, reimagine everything, and using the constraints that we have to really create exciting new opportunities for themselves and create jobs for people and impact society as well. Let's wrap up.
Thank you, Fred. So give a big round of applause to Fred. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,